There are hundreds of basic and alternate recipes in Satisfactory 1.0. Some of them are absolutely amazing, whilst others not so much. So I've made it my mission in Satisfactory to compare every single recipe in the game to inform you guys on what the best and worst recipes are. So welcome to the best recipes in Satisfactory 1.0 series. Today's video is all about the electromagnetic control rods. There are two main ways to make this thing. The basic recipe requires stators and AI limiters, whereas the alternate recipe, otherwise known as the electromagnetic connection rod, requires stators again, but this time high-speed connectors. So really it's a battle between the AI limiter and the high-speed connector. Which one would win? Well, we'll find out in just a moment. I've also added an additional third recipe that I'll explain a bit later on in the video. These control rods are used to make quite a lot of important gear, such as uranium, plutonium, and fixonium fuel rods, which are all extremely important in regards of power, but they do have other non-nuclear purposes, such as to make the magnetic field generator, motors, supercomputers, and even turbo motors. I've got an entire video coming out about this, hopefully soon. So let's begin with the basic ECR recipe, where we need 7.5 stators per minute and 5 AI limiters per minute. And I very quickly want to talk about AI limiters first. As we can see, this recipe is not too bad. We need 100 quickwire per minute, which I've used this recipe by the way, which ends up saving you on some Caterium, which is fantastic. And we also need 25 copper sheets. There is also a second recipe though, and that is the plastic AI limiter, which as the name hints, requires plastic. The reason as to why I'm never going to make a best recipe video for the AI limiter is because this recipe comes down to the question of, do you want to use crude oil? If you don't, then use the recipe I've used, and if you do want to use crude oil, then use this recipe down here. I believe you probably save a bit of quick wire here if you use this recipe, but overall, the basic recipe logistically and time saving wise is just better. One recipe I've literally just covered in my best recipe series is the stators. For this example, we need 7.5 per minute. And to make these, we are using iron pipes and iron wire, which, as again the name hints towards, requires iron. Thus meaning the only thing you are using to make our stators is iron ore, which is fantastic in regards of logistic simplicity, which I absolutely adore. Having a quick look at our resources, we need 92 copper ore per minute, 124 iron ore per minute, and 25.2 Caterium per minute. And also for our power consumption, we need 7 assemblers, 7 constructors, and 8 smelters, giving us a total of 119 megawatts when everything here is fully active. So that's the first recipe pretty much summed up already. So how does this compare to our second recipe, the electromagnetic connection rods? Well, let's take a very quick look. Starting off with our stators, and yes, this is using 2.5 less stators in our previous recipe, which is fantastic. This obviously means that we end up saving iron ore, which again is great. Moving on now though to our high-speed connectors, and again I've just covered this in a recent video, so if you'd like to know more about high-speed connectors, then feel free to check that out. But for this recipe I've just used the basic quickwire cable and circuit board recipe. However, I've still stuck with our roots and I've gone with the copper alternate as the quickwire recipe, since again, you save on Caterium, and I do love to save on a bit of Caterium. But regarding our cable, I've still stuck with the iron wire, since we are already making iron wire over here as well. So I don't want to make copper wire over here, then iron wire over there, since that's just rather confusing. If you're going to commit to a recipe, then fully commit to it. That's what I love to do at least. And lastly, we have circuit boards. Again, I have covered every single circuit board recipe in Satisfactory 1.0, but the reason I've chosen this is not to use my crude oil. But why am I being so stingy on crude oil? Well, I'm using all of it for power consumption and to make other recipes instead. That is the main reason why I try and avoid crude oil whenever I can, since power production is very important in Satisfactory 1.0. Now, let's talk a little bit about our resources required. We need 70 copper ore per minute, 110.3 iron ore per minute, 36 Caterium per minute, and 3.3 raw quartz, which is a very, very small amount, obviously. And in regards to power consumption, let's have a quick look. We had one manufacturer being used, which requires 40 megawatts worth of power, 5 assemblers, 9 constructors, and 7 smelters, giving us a total of 139 megawatts worth of power. Just very quickly, if you enjoy videos like this and you want more guides, tips and tricks, then feel free to subscribe if you wish. You don't have to, but it's a good way to support the channel. You'll also get notified whenever I drop one of these videos. Thank you for all the continued support on the channel, but without further ado, let's get straight back into the video. So we've now seen the first two recipes, and in theory, these are the only two recipes for the electromagnetic connection rods, or control rods, depending on what you're using. Except, what if we were to add water into the mix? I've been doing this with a couple of my recent recipes, and it's very interesting to see, so I want to try and do it again. And for this example, I've used the basic control rod recipe, but I've obviously added in some water. So for example, what this means is rather than needing 124 iron ore or 124 iron ingots, we now only need 67. Essentially, we've halved the amount of iron ore, but we've now added water into the equation. Secondly, when we talk about quick wire, this recipe looks rather confusing now, but luckily it's not. It just requires deuterium, water, and copper, but because I've split everything, we now need less copper and less deuterium, but of course, we now need water. And regarding this final copper sheet recipe, again, we are using water, and we require a bit less resources. Unfortunately, this does have a pretty big effect in regards of power consumption. As we can see, we now need to consume 257 megawatts worth of power, because we need 7 refineries consuming 150 megawatts, which is more power consumption than our previous two recipes with everything combined. When it comes to resources, things don't look too bad at all. We only need 36.8 copper, 67 iron, 16.8 deuterium, and 80 water per minute, which is the equivalent of about 2/3 of the one water extractor, which is again like not too bad at all really. And now we've reached that part of the video where we talk about the best recipe for the electromagnetic control rods in Satisfactory 1.0. Very quickly, let's talk about power. The basic recipe has the best power consumption if you use the layout that I used in my example. The third recipe has the least amount of copper consumption. The third recipe also has the least amount of iron ore consumption and the least amount of deuterium consumption. So resource-wise, this is the best recipe in Satisfactory 1.0, despite it consuming a little bit of water, which might make things here a little bit more difficult. So our first recipe has the best power consumption, our second recipe is decent overall, and our third recipe has the best resource consumption. So it all comes down to the question of what do you want to do personally. If you feel like you want to just save on resources and don't care about power, this is the recipe to go off. But if you only care about saving resources and deuterium, then the first recipe is the best one for you. So in reality, it's all to do with personal preference. But after laying out all three recipes, I hope this video was able to help you guys out to choose which recipe you want to do personally for your playthrough. Regardless, thank you very much for watching. Before we go, a massive thank you to the channel members: Chaos Rising, Scotland Hattie, Mau Mau, Natormal, Yamikael Burns, Variants, Asuna, Nicole Still Plays, and Zhao. If you decide to become a Knight of the Realm for just £2.99 a month, you get access to channel-only emotes, unique badges, and also shoutouts in videos. Memberships are the best way to support my channel, but you don't have to become a member. Even just by watching today's video, you are supporting the channel massively. Here's a couple more videos I've made that you might be interested in. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Have an amazing rest of your day. And remember, Godspeed.